Hi, I'm Gabriel from 10 Pound Gorilla, and today I'm going to be talking about Instagram.css. So this week I decided to look into this filter because it was on our list of topics to look at, because it seemed like an interesting thing that we might be able to implement in a few different places, actually. Basically, it allows you to apply Instagram filters to images just by applying a class to the container. So we can see there are all these different effects, and it's pretty interesting what it can do. It turns out, though, that this topic alone is kind of, I suppose, pleasantly boring because it's very lightweight. So if we just look at the implementations here, it just imports the filters, and the filters are actually like very simple. The entire minified CSS is only this big, which is nice because that actually means that we can add it to a site without really adding a ton of weight. And it kind of makes it more useful. But can't really talk about that for very long. So I thought the more interesting part was how it can be applied into Sexy. So here, I have this that outputs an image with a filter. But in the form, I set it up to actually give you a preview of the filter before you press save. So let's see. Let's go choose Inkwell is a really obvious one because it turns it black and white. You can see it before it saves. This probably isn't the ideal way to implement this, but I kind of ran out of time. But I found out that, so I have this preview field, which is an empty field that's meant to display a message, so it displays whatever's in the notes field. If you add a formula to the notes field, you can actually have an output, you can have an output markup, and it will display the markup where the message is supposed to be. So this window is too small to meaningfully see it, so I've copied it here. Basically, I'm just outputting the image, and I'm taking the filter that's applied, and I'm grabbing the image from 2Sexy's web API to display it there. So it's pulling the image from the web API, displaying it here, and then applying the filter just as you go. And that allows slightly better recognition of what it's going to look like before you actually press save and make the change live. So I think ideally this would be set up a little bit differently. We could do something like, I looked into 2Sexy custom fields, which is probably the correct way to go about this realistically. And you could have that set up. You could even have the image just set up for each filter, so you can like visually see all of them at once. And you can click on the one that you choose, but that would take a bit more time. But as a proof of concept, I think this is an interesting idea and something that could be implemented pretty easily once built, kind of wherever. I suppose that's all that I have to talk about strictly for the moment. So are there any questions?
I think clients would really enjoy this because people struggle with photo editing, and that's super simple. So I think that's a great feature.
It's cool that the library for adding that CSS is pretty small overall, and you can even pare it back even further by saying, you know, we don't need these 6 or 7 different filters and exclude that code. I really do like that preview option because as an end user, if I'm trying to find a good filter for it and I need to change 4 or 5 different times, like going in and out of edit mode would be super tedious. So that's nice to be able to get that preview.
The main drawback on top of that, I'm guessing this probably isn't how messages are supposed to work. But the main drawback to how it's implemented right now is that you have to save the photo that you apply before you can view it down here because it's getting it from the web API. Like if I was to go change the image out right now, it would still show this until I saved and reopened the form. Which isn't the best experience, but I haven't used the web API as much as maybe some other people have. So there might be a way to grab this without having to save, but I wasn't able to figure that out in the time that I had.
So you save the initial image, then you when you open it back up, that image filter is populated with the image that was selected as well.
Yes.
And that image field is it a field, or is that you're saying that's just the notes field of that file picker? Or that,
so I mean, this is just a normal image field up here, but this is an empty field meant to display a text message. I am using a formula on that preview field to target the notes, which is the text that it displays. And instead of text, I'm returning markup, so it's displaying that markup. But the JavaScript, which I'd like to see it better, I copied it into here because the other window is tiny. Basically, I use the web API to grab the image, apply the filter as necessary, and output what it should look for the user's settings that they've chosen. I don't know if you've had experience grabbing images from the web API. Because I know if you use formulas, like, for example, I'll actually just...
I don't know that you need the web API for it, because you could grab the image without it, because the image exists as a field in the existing form, right?
Yes, but the problem is, as I'm demonstrating now, the problem with that is if I go and grab data.image, which is this,
yeah,
it doesn't give you an image, it gives you the file number. But
I think if you put that file in the source, does it not render? Like if you did image source file, would that render the image?
I'm doing that, but it just results in a broken image because
so now put
the way this is being injected.
Backslashes in front.
I think the issue is that the way this is working, it's not like it's running through DNN systems. This is JavaScript that's injecting markup into the form.
The
if
other
it was
way
done, sorry.
You can do it as what they call empirical fields. But I don't know that that would solve the problem where you're saying you have to go out before you come back in, because that would you still probably have that exact same thing. Empirical, I probably pronounced it wrong. Fields in TwoSexy are temporary fields. They don't use them to temporarily store data. But then once the record's saved and then you go edit it again, that field is empty or doesn't retain the initial saved data. So there's some ways I've used that to do things similar to like what you've done, Gabe, with this web API, but I don't think it would fix what you're saying, which is going out and then coming back in.
And this implementation is also even slightly more complicated than it looks just from what I've shown, because I've had to I have an unfinished custom field that's hidden here that is pulling in the CSS for this, because the way this form works, it is an iframe, and therefore the styles from the page do not get applied. So you have to apply any styles that you're going to use separately. But it applies to the entire form when you do. So that's something to keep in mind and also be careful with, even when you are trying to account for it.
So did you create a CSS file then and load it in that content type?
I didn't create one, but I pulled in the, one second. So I have a custom field type attached to this app because I made this its own TwoSexy app. And in the source for that custom field type, it pulls in the Instagram.css file. That makes sense.
Yeah. No, that's what I presume that.
But I think ideally, with a little bit more time, the way to do this would be to just make it a standalone custom field. But that requires a little more in-depth knowledge of certain things. But I thought it was interesting that this is possible, even if I don't think it's necessarily the correct way to handle it. The fact that this works means that it can be done in a way that's at least largely user-friendly, more user-friendly than just having a text field with, like if I just had this, I don't think that would be a very useful thing because I'd have to go through and save it every time, which would make it almost not worth implementing because nobody knows what these mean, really. They're kind of just names. So
you could like develop that as like a custom field type, and like put in preview images next to like the each filter. So yeah, I mean, it could be expanded on.
Yeah, that's what I was mentioning. I think that's probably the correct way to do it, the way that it's meant to be handled.
Yeah.
But that would also be nice because you could make us effectively almost like a bootstrap grid of, probably have to code them as like radio buttons, where you just have a preview for each of these filters with the name and the image like tiny. So you can view all of them at once instead of, because even this still requires you to go and click through, which is fine. I guess you can use the keyboard too. But the other way, with a custom field design that way, would allow you to directly compare them, which might be nice. So I guess, are there any other questions or comments?
I think it's nice. I think that the grid idea does make a lot of sense. It reminds me of stuff in Photoshop where you have to go to the drop down, select one, see what it looks like and everything. So I think this is cool.
Freaking transfer modes in Photoshop get me every time. I'm just scanning through them.
This might not even just apply to filters. Like we could probably do this type of stuff with other things that we use commonly, maybe. I know that the idea is there for like icon fonts. I think that field already exists. But stuff like that. I think the example they used was a custom field for a color picker, actually, which is actually already built. We could even just pull that in, possibly, in places that a color picker makes sense, instead of having people need to either select from like 3 options strictly or just
know the hex value or the RGB that you can paste in.
Be sure to like this video and subscribe to our Gorilla Learning Lab. We have a lot more banana tidbits for you to get ape over. Check out our other videos or visit our website at www.10poundgorilla.com. I'm swinging on out of here.
Ooh, ooh, ah, ah. Ooh, ooh, ooh. You're not subscribed? That's bananas.